values framework. I'm sure this one's, a lot of you would have heard of it. It tells us that high-performing organizations know when to operate with stability and when to move with agility. And they know when to align internally and when to look outward and adapt. So are we ahead of the game, or are we just kind of moving with it, or we are lagging? So when you're lagging and you're yet to adapt, you do tend to have higher attrition, lower involvement, less inclusivity, little stress in the organization, and that is the kind of things that you should be looking out for and really bringing about quick changes. I think, so before I move on and talk about further on AI, I want to talk about a little bit about trust, like I said earlier. I think trust for some reason is often misunderstood as an emotion. I don't think it's an emotion, it's actually a science, right? Because when people feel trusted, and this is not my study, I haven't done it, their brain releases oxytocin, which boosts collaboration, empathy, creativity, and problem solving. And when trust drops, cortisol rises, which is a stress hormone, which goes up, people become protective, people stop innovating, stop thinking, stop giving ideas, because they're always under stress and what we call under CYA culture that begins in the organization. Now, when people are just living to survive, what will the culture of the organization be? How adaptive do you think we will be? How innovative do you think an organization will be is what? And Gallup has a very interesting research which talks about, now I come to the main point, that managers influence 70% of engagement. And engagement is not about, our employee engagement TikTok where we talk about, oh, did you meet 5 people today? Did you have a conversation? Did you have coffee with 10 people? It's not about that. It's about really connecting and building trust and transparency. Now, how do you create trust, right? But before I go there, I'll give you some stats. 70%, we talked about that managers influence engagement, and they're also the biggest cultural force inside an organization. Disengagement, on the other hand, costs almost 9% of the world's GDP, which means trillions of dollars lost in creativity, lost trust, and lost collaboration. And there's another trust barometer called Edelman's Trust Barometer, which reminds us that people trust what they see, which is fairness, transparency, and consistency. It is not about what you say. I may say I'm the most transparent person, but I don't share any ideas because I feel I get power by holding information back. Then it doesn't work. So are you walking the talk becomes a very important key to creating trust. And like they say, trust is not optional, trust is a strategy. So the way I look at trust, and I think, a lot of people take a lot of time to trust individuals in an organization. So I think trust is like a horizontal line, one simple line, where low trust to high trust. If you just put a line on a piece of paper. And but a line that cannot stand on its own. What you need is a simple vertical line which talks about validation, right? So when you start trusting somebody, you need to validate. Right? When you validate, and every time your trust kind of increases with the individual because validation is coming out as positive, and you tend to improve your trust levels. But when you validate and the trust goes down is when you know. And that is how people actually are trusting us as organization or as people or as leaders as well. Right? They're looking whether, can I trust you? Because every single thing that we're doing, which goes back to emotional bank accounts, I'm sure you all know that, how are we behaving? How are we operating? Are we really creating a framework or creating a culture where people can trust us, and do we also trust? And trust begets trust. So do we start or do we don't? And we don't. And are we okay to give real feedback? Sometimes, another thing which I fail to understand, it's very good to give feedback. We love giving feedback. We love telling people what is wrong with them. We just enjoy it. But do we ever take feedback? Do we ask for feedback? Do we seek feedback from our team members, or we hide away? Because sometimes we don't know what we're doing well or what we're doing wrong. Sometimes we believe we're doing right, but maybe that's not how it's getting translated to your teams or to the larger organization at large. So I think that is something you may want to focus on. And when you start to repeat these acts of consistency, which support your trust, then you start to trust fully, right? Then you say, okay, I know, I'm sure we all have team members where we fully trust them and we know you give it to them, there'll be accountability and they've finished the job. But you also have people that you have to continuously follow up and figure out because there's been validation of trust not being formed. Of course, the next pillar of culture by design is embracing AI as a powerful enabler. Now, AI helps team make faster, clearer, more confident decisions because it brings maturity, data maturity. Now, I don't think AI can replace human beings. I don't think that's going to happen, at least in my lifetime, I can guarantee you. I don't have much life left, but I know it's not going to happen in mine. So I can really talk about my life. After that, I will not be around for you to blame. But having said that, I think individuals are going to be important. People are going to be important. It's a wave. It's very interesting. At one point in 2000, there was a wave of, oh, the world is going to go crazy. Then all this technology came. We started saying, oh, there'll be no jobs. Same thing happened way back in Industrial Revolution. There'll be no jobs. Machines are going to take over. If you go back and read some news, it's crazy, right? It's the same thing. I think we just are going through change and not everybody is very comfortable with change. I think we need to just adapt it and bring it into our life. I don't see anything wrong in copy-pasting ideas. I don't think there's anything wrong. Voltaire said something very beautiful. He said there is nothing original. Originality is actually a copy of something else. So you're either taking it from nature or somewhere. So it's nothing is original in the world. So if that is the case, then what is wrong? If I'm learning from a machine maybe has a collective knowledge. Don't we learn today? I mean, I'll be learning from you, you're learning from me. We're all learning from each other. How is that any different? That there's a machine telling you the same thing. And why is that such a threat? So I think, how do we make it a friend? How do we make it get into our lives and in a way, embrace it? That will be the key for HR to really come up there and be strong. And sometimes also push back when you think the tool will actually do more harm than help the organization. Because not everything that will come through AI will be perfect. I think I'm sure you're also reading the studies that it's AI biased as human beings are. Because people who are inputting data are people and they do come with biases. So, we're assuming that there'll be no bias. There will be bias. As much as you try, somebody is inputting the data. The data is coming from human brains only. And those humans are biased. We are all biased in some form or manner, right? Some will be huge on certain topics, some will be lesser, but we all have our biases. And that gets into data, and that data is what is consumed by all of us. And we assume that, everything coming from AI is perfect and gospel truth. No, it's not. I think that is where human intervention will be required. That is where I think we as HR fraternity will play a very important role to bring in a different perspective. While I also believe AI may bring you a lot of data for you to take better decisions, for us to maybe when we talk to leaders, and somewhere, leaders love data. I don't know why, but they just love numbers. They think the world is about numbers, and they just get so enthralled by anybody who's throwing data at them. They just love it, which is okay. I mean, sometimes you have to speak your customer's language, so speak your customer's language. Bring in data, but bring in your human intelligence. Don't ever undermine yourself only because AI is saying so. I think the knowledge, the experience that you carry, and your collective experience, right, of your teams will be far, far more than what AI will bring in. But again, use it as your friend and not as something that I have to go against or not work with. One very interesting classic example is, Albania. I don't know how many of you read that news. They appointed an AI minister. It's called Daila. And that aims to replace human-led processes with algorithm. And interestingly, they have brought in bribery. They claim that bribery has come down significantly because it's, of course, rolled out as a governance model within the government. And they believe it's reducing human bias and establishing a culture of fairness. So yeah, maybe somewhere it will work. Procurement, it will work. In your recruitment, you also know that there was a big news that came some time back on, I won't name the company because some of you might be from the organization and I may get beaten up later. So, but where, the AI was bringing out CVs together about who are the people who should be shortlisted. And there was a huge bias. So, of course, it was in the US, and there was a certain community that was left behind because the name sounded like that. So automatically, and that is what I meant by AI bias. And that is where, if there was a human intelligence at play when these things were happening, then they could have nipped it in the bud. But that is where they made a mistake, that they relied completely on AI and human intelligence was not brought in. Maybe if, and that's what I'm saying, use AI, but use it intelligibly, where you bring in your perspective and your ideas and your thought, because you're not here because just by chance, no, just because I grew up, I'm sitting on the table. You're sitting on the table because you carry a lot of experience and a lot of value. So bring in that value when you're rolling out AI. So for AI to truly support culture by design, I think organizations, one thing I love about AI is must build a learning culture, because AI does have a lot of literacy in a universal skill. And this is not just for tech teams, even for people in the HR, right? I think we should be confident in using AI for our daily tasks. There's nothing wrong. It's okay to use ChatGPT. It's okay to use Microsoft Pilot to draw your mails. Sometimes, there's a very interesting tool I will tell you, which I use, and it's been amazing in ChatGPT. So they have a tool within ChatGPT. If you want to, there are two tools which I love. One is the NVC, nonviolent communication. And you can put nonviolent communication, and you can have, if you want to have a tough conversation with somebody without really antagonizing the relationship, it will tell you how to. Because sometimes, we are humans, we just react. So it tells you what kind of language to use. It just guides you. So there's no harm in learning from it. The second is there's a coach. I forget the name, but there's a coach, and you can always type saying that, I need a coach too. And what you can do is, for example, I use it for me. If I will not tell you how many, but approximately, say, 10 direct reports. So I've created a folder for each, the kind of conversations I'm having, or if I'm struggling with something. And what kind of conversations should I be having, what kind of coaching conversations. So in a way, it becomes your coach and a mentor. But again, you have to bring in human intelligence. You just don't copy paste and read out the whole language, but you bring in yours. Okay, this makes sense. This is something I want to pick from and learn. So there are a lot of ways you can use AI, but again, like I said, always bring in your authenticity. Okay, I'll move on from AI to what I believe there are 5 things which is about high performance culture, right? And this is across studies I picked up from Harvard, MIT, Deloitte, McKinsey, which says high performing cultures consistently do 5 things. First, they communicate transparently, which we know that also builds trust, right? I think people can handle complexity, people can handle ambiguity, people can handle craziness, but what they can't handle is silence. They don't like when people don't know what's going on. Why am I doing what I'm doing? So I think that is one. Clear communication reduces anxiety. And when there is less anxiety, what goes down? The stress hormone goes down. And it builds alignment. The second, organizations that want to be high performing, they invest in managerial capability, especially frontline managers and mid-level managers. Because I think what happens, and especially more so in India, whether we like it or not, we do have big egos, little bigger, right? We don't want to hear after a while, because I've got so many years of experience. How can I learn from you? I know everything. So then now I have to learn, but I have to manage a team. So when I'm a manager of people, while I was an individual contributor, I've become a manager of people. Now my skill set has to change, right? I can't do the same thing I was doing as an individual contributor, but very few organizations invest. When you invest, for me to just understand how to deal with people, then I become a manager of people, which is again another skill set, right? Because when you're a manager of individual contributors, is very different than being manager of managers, and so on and so forth as you grow up the chain. I think every time if we end up learning something, and that is why AI can help you. So use AI as a friend. There are a lot of, not just AI, even regular courses available. Even if your organization is not investing, and this is what you must be probably telling your teams. Assume you don't have learning budgets. It can happen to all of us. At least try and get a Coursera or whatever tools that you can use where people can self-learn and recommend courses for them, because that helps at least managers becoming aligned to your way of working. What is your company's way of working? For example, in Biocon, we have a certain way of working for managers. You need to be transparent. You have to listen to ideas before you say no or yes. Sit on it for 3 days. You cannot say no to an idea. So whatever your culture is, you guys decide. But I think there needs to be some bit of work there. And like we say, like listening, coaching, and clarity are not soft skills. They are infrastructure, or as we say within that operating system, most important of the Word document, the Excel, and the PowerPoint. So I think you need to decide what are your top 3. The third thing that they spoke about was that they build psychological safety, which I think we hear a lot. We talk about it. And it's all about how do you build teamwork. You see, when you make heroes in an organization, that means you need problems to be resolved. So a lot of people will create problems, then they will want to be a hero. Then when you have a hero, you also need a villain. Then they will create a villain. Then everybody will tell them how great they are. Then they will self-process, that I'm so great, I'm so wonderful. Then everybody will say, wow. So when you create this hero worshipping and hero culture, if you have a culture where individuals are celebrated, I think please, my view would be try and not let it grow. Let it be team. Let it be more project driven. As a matter of fact, we run a CSR arm called Biocon Academy. And there, when we are training these students, we tell them, we give them any project work. And we said, you have to work in teams. We don't want individual input. So you may be great, but if you can't work with teams, tell me, we're all working in organizations, right? When you can't work in a team, can you really be a great, after a while you will get called out, right? Can you really become a good leader over a period of time? Because a leader will always have an issue because it's all about me. And this silo is where the problems happen and the culture goes for a toss. The fourth thing they talk about, connecting work to purpose and fairness. And which I think is most important, especially purpose, because if you don't have a purpose in an organization, please create one. Because then people don't know what are we working for. For example, we have a very simple purpose to make medicine available at the most affordable prices for every individual, right? So it's a great purpose to work towards. So anything that people are doing, we actually tell them that you are saving lives, right? Every individual, every small role is saving lives. Even if you're an intern for some time, even if you're working as a contract labor for some time, you are helping and supporting somebody's life. So it's all about how you are propagating your purpose. And fairness. I think people give their best when they feel respected. Respect is underrated in organizations. We assume respect comes naturally. No, it doesn't. I can tell you, having worked with so many organizations, having been part of various sessions and whatever, respect doesn't come naturally to people. We do not respect juniors, we respect only seniors. That comes very naturally to us, respecting seniors. But I think if we can, please focus on that, because the world is changing. I'm sure there's some of the Gen Z sitting here as well. They're not going to take our shit, right? They want to be respected. They want to be appreciated. They want to be told the way things are. Good, bad, ugly, it doesn't matter. But if you don't communicate with people, it's not going to work. I think, and being fair. So the world of, so many years of experience, so many years of logic, it doesn't work anymore. It's all about the skills that you bring to the table. I think world is moving and changing very, very fast. There's very recently somebody in grade 5 already, right, in some tech company, which is doing the news about, I think, 2 years back, if I'm not mistaken. The guy must have passed high school by now. And got a 1.5 CR salary at that age. It's because it's about skill, so it's not about age at all. And these are changes. I'm not saying this is prevalent everywhere, but I'm just saying things are changing. I'm not saying you have to now get all school graders in your shop floor or in your organizations, but we need to be open to the idea that there will be people who will be smarter than us. Whether we like it or not. The fifth bit is the organizations that balance reliability with adaptability, which means they honor discipline, but they encourage curiosity. They maintain strong systems, but they update those systems often. And this balance is a signature of winning culture. So let me give you a very interesting example of how culture can become a performance multiplier. And I won't again name the organization because we're wrong, but it's a large global company that has been struggling with silos, slow decision making, and low trust. So they tried the whole values, they wrote the new values, new processes, but nothing changed. Then the leadership made a simple shift. They focused on just 3 non-negotiables, only 3. And which were, 1, setting clear expectations with individuals. 2nd, having weekly check-ins. And 3rd, giving timely, transparent feedback. And that's about it. They just did this consistently, and the change was remarkable. And these 3 were also embedded into their performance systems, leadership scorecards, daily routines, conversations, town halls, leadership connects, and decisions became faster. Teams collaborated more, employees felt more supported, engagement scores rose, and the culture didn't change because of posters or campaigns or creating brand ambassadors or culture ambassadors, but it changed because leaders changed how they showed up every day. They were just doing these three things consistently every single week because they were expected to and they were measured on it. So I think rather than doing a full paintbrush on everything, focus on what you guys want to drive, and that becomes your culture. So how do we measure culture? We often think culture is intangible, or we do these surveys, right? There is a Denison Culture Survey, which talks about how we're doing on mission, involvement, adaptability, and consistency. And I think another thing you must do whenever you go around your organization, see how many people speak up. That's a great way of figuring out cultures. In your town halls, how many people ask questions? In your town hall, how many people, especially if you have an online town hall, how many people ask anonymous questions, especially the tough ones, right? So that tells you what your culture is. If people have the guts to ask you a question non-anonymously and give you a name, which is not an easy question to ask, and they may get, and then is there a repercussion? Then I think and there's no repercussion, you've figured out a great culture because you're allowing people to be. And for every question, you may not have an answer, but you're open to taking up every question in a town hall. I think that tells you whether culture, how the organization is working, how the organization is thriving, what kind of psychological safety the organization is providing to every single employee. And trust indexes also tell us how fair and transparent we are, which I'm sure we do our culture surveys. And I think in your culture survey, if you get the chance, please focus more on manager-employee relationships, because I think that becomes the key. And while they say employees leave for managers, but let's believe that people also leave for compensation today. That is also a case, right? Things have changed a little from what, at least when I started in the workforce. Decision-making speed is another real indicator. So when your customers tell you it takes too long, or when your employees tell you that it takes too long for a decision to be closed, or something to get approved, your approval processes. Sometimes we go around in circles. There are 15 people who have to approve before a decision is taken, right? And that is when you know it's a laggard culture, something that is pulling the organization back. That's when you can step in and bring in AI, which becomes your data centricity, or where you change the processes, the way they work. Because clearly that becomes a huge deterrent to employees who are high performers. Because when your high performers leave, that means you have an issue with your decision-making process or idea generating where you're not listening to them. That means psychological safety is low, decision-making is slow, and the culture is more about my way or highway. That's when you lose your high performers. The other thing I think is also DEIB, right? The whole diversity. Of course, US is on a different track and I will talk about it. But DI outcomes are another area which show how inclusion is lived or spoken about. Now, and thankfully in HR we have mostly women, so which is good to know, at least 60-70% are women, which is great. But I think if you go to the shop floor and the more and higher you go, you see lesser women. If organizations take target of increasing women in leadership, an intentional target, and are working towards it. So it's not just target taken and once a quarter people speak about it and then it's ending, and then Women's Day we all are suddenly women champions, and then after that 11 months we're not interested. That doesn't work. So it's about how do you get women a seat on the table. I think, and I'm going to talk because this is very passionate, I'm very passionate about this subject, and I'm going to digress a little, so please bear with me. But I strongly believe men have a great camaraderie towards each other, and they often will not call out each other's behavior. Women, on the other hand, become this crusader of truth all the time. So it doesn't matter, man or a woman, they will call out behaviors. I have been that woman, I can tell you. Sometimes I think we need to be women, I'm talking to us, we need to be as much, compassionate towards women colleagues as men are towards men. And no, nothing against men. Please continue doing it. It's a good thing. It's just that we need to learn that as well. Sorry, I know I digress. It's from another topic, but I had to say it. Okay. But let me tell you one thing. Every organization faces similar challenges. Nobody is perfect yet and will never be, right? We are creating in different diverse inputs. People come with their own insecurities. Organizations have their own insecurities as well, right? And that culture also permeates. So I think it's all about how do we get the culture to become positive. Another thing that I have seen where culture becomes positive when you also reward and recognize. So get your managers to learn first, not to critique, first try and say positive, then talk about negative. I think everybody knows about parent-adult, right? So I think we become a very critical parent very quickly. So if you can change that, just a small little change of moving from that parent-child to a adult, I think it'll become better for all of us. So we, at the organization that I belong to, I think we have a strong foundation. I think everybody knows Kiran. Kiran is somebody who has always, okay, I've got an indicator, time's up. So I will take 2 minutes max. We have a mission, like I said, that truly matters. And Kiran is somebody who's very open. And I'm sure you see her tweeting and talking about everything very openly. And that's how she's at work. So it's not a different culture there and a different person here. And it's so interesting. You can even tell her if you don't agree with her. And there's no ego. Maybe that's great about women bosses. Normally, I find women bosses having a little lesser ego than, again, no offense to men, but males do have a little more ego than women do. For some reason, I don't know why, but they do. Okay. Yeah, I am finishing. Give me 1 minute more. So I'll just close it because, and very, very briefly, that I think high performance cultures are built through ordinary moments, not extraordinary moments. Not extraordinary things have to be done well, but very ordinary things done extraordinarily well. I think moments of clarity, of transparency, of fairness, of listening, of just hearing, of letting people speak. Sometimes people just want to vent. You don't even need to respond, and allow them to vent. And if you honor these moments consistently, I think we build a culture that strengthens people, accelerates progress, and creates impact far beyond our walls. That's all I want to say. Thank you for your time. Thanks. Thank you. Did I go?
Thank you, Ms. Malinda, for the powerful and inspiring address. Your insight on international culture, building leadership accountability, and nurturing trust have truly reinforced the critical role culture plays as competitive advances in today's organization. We deeply appreciate the practical wisdom you shared with us today. Thank you so much. Now, we are moving on to our next panel discussion, well-being as strategy, fueling people and performance. Employee well-being has moved far beyond just being a benefit. It's more than a program priority, and a critical business strategy. Organization that invests in holistic well-being across physical, mental, and emotional and social dimension consistently see higher engagement and better result. This session will explore how leaders can embed well-being deeply into organization culture. It is my privilege to welcome our esteemed speaker, Govindraj MK, CHRO Mintra, Sajid Iqbal, CHRO Brigade, Swadesh Behra, Chief People Officer Titan. We have the moderator, Ms. Vasudha Mangalam, Senior Vice President Ultraviolet. Ladies and gentlemen, please give us a huge round of applause as our speakers get on the stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I hope you had a great day today. Looks like the culture a bit seems to have, consumed a lot. Great. So we'll get into this session right away. Today we are exploring a theme that's pretty close to my heart, that is well-being. I think well-being as a strategy, well-being as such as a topic is something that is core to every human being, right? And, from good old days to now, well-being in itself has evolved quite a lot. Organizations to organizations as well as generations to generations, well-being in itself has had various connotations, various meanings. The needs have changed from a welfare officer of the past to what HR is driving today to be somebody who is really connected to the business, to drive organizational outcomes, growth through programs. Well-being becomes a very, very core and integral part of any organization and plays a pivotal role. So we are here to discuss this topic, and I am actually very, very honored, and we have with us distinguished guests with abundant experience, and we are here together to explore this and unpack various aspects of this topic, and here we are. All right, welcome on board and welcome to this topic. Let me see my cue cards. Should we right away go to the questions? All right. So my first question is to Mr. Swadesh. And here it is. How do you ensure that wellness initiatives are personalized and inclusive rather than being very generic or one size fits all?
So thank you, Vasudha, and really excited to be present here. And I think I was listening to some of the lunch conversations, and everybody was saying that, this is working very well. And I think I saw the kind of a passion in everybody here. And I'm glad that we are discussing today about wellness and well-being as a strategy. I think you just touched upon, I don't think whether, if you remember, starting from the 8 hours of work or even a break, I think those statutes must have been written many, many years back. I think wellness started as a thought from then onwards. I think immediately after COVID, I think it has taken a center stage, wellness, every organization today. And suddenly wellness became very important. And I'm so glad that it happened like that. Now, coming back to your question, saying that wellness strategy is being generic, I think the more and more, everything around us is becoming personalized. Okay, if you look at employee, the employee is also a consumer. The same consumer when is consuming OTT, or the same consumer is present in any social media platforms, I think the content he or she is consuming is personalized, right? And the same employee and the same consumer is when she is walking inside an organization as an employee. More and more, anything what we do in our people function or HR strategy, everything, it could be learning, it could be wellness strategy. I think there is also a need for the same personalized experience the same consumer and the same employee is seeking today. If I talk about my own organization, I don't think we have reached to a stage of personalization the way our employees experiencing as a consumer outside. But what we do, we have looked at different multiple cohorts rather than having generic policies. For an example, if you really look at different cohorts, it could be working mothers could be one cohort. Okay, employees with special children could be another cohort. Like for an example, or it could be Gen Zs could be another cohort. You know, every organization today we have multi-generational workforce. I think when you look at different cohorts and design your wellness strategy, I think to some extent it is getting personalized. But then we are a little far away from really designing it for every employee. And we're not far away. I think that's with AI and technology coming in. I'm sure today, since morning, I mean, lot must have been discussed on AI, I can see here. And with advent of AI, it's possible. It can get democratized, right? So learning, development can get democratized. The same way, even wellness also can get democratized with the advent of AI and technology. So one thing which we do in our organization is, how do we know what works? So we have this practice of listening. And we spend, myself and the managing director, we spend 100 hours, close to 100 hours of listening every year.
Wow.
And this is besides the travel time. So we cut the organization into different cohorts, smaller cohorts. And that's where we look at the needs. And through the conversations, there are a lot of needs from in the wellness side also we get to hear. Like for an example, I mentioned about employees with special children. And only when we spoke to them, we realized that can we ask them to work, one is giving them a flexi option, but also everybody works for 8 hours, they work for 7 hours, right? So small gestures like that, small initiatives like that goes a long way in really catering to multiple cohorts of your employees rather than making generic policies. But we are far away from making it and customizing it and individualizing wellness practices. But I think with the advent of technology, that is possible going forward.
Thank you. I think creating that sense of belonging for various cohorts and also customizing, that's a great one. Thank you for actually introducing such programs. I have one more question for you, Sudesh. Looking ahead, what trends or innovations do you believe will shape corporate well-being? And what are the strategies that what we could foresee over the next few years?
I think data analytics is one thing which in many organizations who are evolved have started doing it. Like for an example, everybody present in this room in all your organizations, I'm sure you all must be going for annual health checkups, right? But then more and more getting into the analytics of the health data so that when you do your interventions, you're much more sharper. So I see the analytics getting used in a much better fashion going forward in the wellness space. When we looked at it, actually tells us the percentage of people who are in the risk of getting cardiac diseases, people who are obese, people who are into diabetes, and it throws up multiple small groups and different disease areas which needs to be addressed. I think that's something which I see coming. And I also see that there could be going forward. I mean, it's a little bit of a crystal ball gazing, and with the advent of technology, I think it's again will become personalized, which I was just mentioning some time back. Every employee might have a single page and all the healthcare data of past couple of years, and he or she will be able to see. And today, of course, because healthcare data is, you cannot see, it is confidential. But if it can come through another organization who does the analysis, and the individualized page can be provided to employees, I think it's just another example of personalization. So that's something which I see. And with of course, with AI and all, a lot of suggestions can happen. Like, the AI engine can look at your health data and start recommending to you, what are the initiatives one employee needs to take. So those are the little bit of changes which I foresee is going to come in the future. The usage of technology is going to be in a much faster pace than what it is currently today.
Thank you. Great. This next question is for Mr. Sajid. In an organization, how has well-being evolved from traditional benefits initiative to a core part of employee value proposition that defines the culture and the employer brand?
Sure. So, look, great to be here, but let me just do a crisp answer to this one, is that the way to measure that this is something which is central to a lot of companies' benefits strategy, part of EVP, is the fact of number of companies that are in the space of wellness today. Right? There was a time when there used to be just one or two companies that were typically doing counseling services as the business for companies. And now you would see, I would say, just in Bangalore, there may be at least about 10, 15 startups or companies that employ anywhere from 100 to about 500 counselors, which is just one aspect of well-being. But as I have the mic, I just want to share something which is personal to me, but I think it will strike a chord with many of people here. So when I used to be at maybe a few years ago, attending conference like these, and the moment the wellness word used to come, it used to be that when I maybe add 10 more years to my life, this word will have a meaning, right? You just take it as something which is on paper. So let me share with you something that I went through, and I'll draw the example with a laptop. So if you keep your laptop on for days and days, one fine day, the laptop will have a blue screen, or it will just stop working. Right? So what happens then? Right? I went through that of not shutting down my laptop. Basically, the applications keep on running, and one fine day, the memory of that laptop is exhausted, and then you have to call up an expert, which is your IT person. So the story I want to share with you is on wellness, is my personal story. So I used to work for a multinational company for a fairly long time, 22 years. And my meetings used to start, some of the meetings at 6 p.m. It used to be run between 6 to 8, because that's the time that the US used to wake up. And then about 7 years ago, I got an Asia Pacific job, which means my start of the day used to be roughly about sometimes 8 a.m. call, because Australia used to be up that time. You have to catch Australia. And many people in Bangalore do that, because you would ideally support a country which is in Asia. And if in case you are unfortunate like me, you will also cover US, which is late hours. Yeah. So my wife used to look at me that this guy typically ends his day at 10 o'clock, 10:30. And because the topics are so many for us, you get up in the morning and the first thing you do is maybe you'll have a tea, coffee, and then you open your laptop because you have to do a call. So how it impacted me is that very much like a laptop, one fine day, I had a blue screen. And it hit me very hard that this topic of wellness or health, it really jolts you, because at that point of time, you can't reverse what you have been doing for so many years. Correct? So the message that I want to give is that this topic of wellness, or you talk about when you go through a scenario of anxiety, burnout, or a health scenario in your family, then it hits you. And the thing that we can do is, most of our waking hours in India is with our colleagues in the office. Unfortunately, because of traffic in Bangalore, the days are long, correct? So it is very core, because if you are, for example, do things which are accessible for employees in your office premises, okay? It could even be an annual health checkup rather than going out and taking a half-day leave. You are able to do it at the closest hospital or the hospital comes to you. It is just a marker of how things are. So I feel that as India, as a country grows in terms of its own number of people working, most of us will work till our retirement age. And rather than waiting when we are 50, I think leave aside the company strategy. I think it should be our personal strategy to keep wellness on our radar as top 2 or 3 goals we have. So more on this, but that's, I wanted to share it because it's something all of us should be aware of, that it when it hits hard at a personal level, it's very tough to rewind the clock.
Well said, actually. Shifting from a corporate agenda to one's own discipline and agenda is very important. Now, each one of us have to remain cognizant about it. Great, thank you. I have a question to Mr. Govindraj. How do you see well-being becoming a more central part of the companies today? The core.
The core. Yeah, first of all, good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Good afternoon still, right? Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm happy to see a full house, every seat still, and all of you attentively looking at us. So thank you for your patience and being here. And thanks to the organizers to have us here. Really, hearing both of you, they already have said like why it is core. I'll add a little bit more to it. And the evolution also how well-being. We are glad that we are having conferences and topics and themes which are talking about wellness and well-being. And that's how it has evolved over the years. And especially with COVID, it has absolutely accelerated. I think now people have started forgetting about it, but now this theme has caught up by itself and it has become very important. And then personal examples at all levels is working. I think, I don't know, so many of you would have heard the word VUCA, which is old term. So I'm not asking, how many of you have heard the word BANI? B-A-N-I, not the influencer or serial, but B-A-N-I. Please raise your hands. Okay. So this is a more recent concept, right? Like 2018, a futurist named James Cashew came about the world we live in. And that's why it's becoming core, like I'm getting there, is the context in which we live in has changed dramatically. So BANI stands for, B stands for the world we live in is brittle, looks very solid on top, but can crumble at any time. Anxious, people are very anxious, the whole world is very anxious, on the toes all the time. N for non-linear, we can't we have so much of data. The most amount of data possibly we have ever had is happening now and we'll get more and more, but you can't draw causality very easily. And incomprehensible. Again, with everything which we have, it's still, you can't explain everything. We can see it play out in geopolitics. You can see it play out everywhere. And if you see the second point was on anxiety, right? Anxious world. So wellness, there are multiple things about wellness. Physical well-being is a very obvious one. But mental well-being, and a lot of people talk about in the workplace, stress, and it has always been spoken about. But now, the context in which we live in has also got a lot of anxiety which it builds in people. And of course, there is the workplace. So apart from physical well-being, mental well-being has come to the fore. There are a lot of people much more open about going to therapy, not the ChatGPT therapy. That's the wrong thing to do. Just go to the real therapist, people who can do real counseling. And a lot of organizations do that. I'll briefly talk about what we do in Mantra as well. But in the non-comprehensible and this part of non-linear and incomprehensible part also makes it very difficult for us to solve anything. And especially for leadership. Leadership was expected to solve problems, have the answers, guide the rest of them. But unfortunately in this new world, fortunately or unfortunately, matter of perspective, but in this new world, nobody has all the answers, and especially the leaders. They'll have to rely on the larger ecosystem and go directionally into a solution and iterate and move. And this causes stress, and it's a way of working which probably leadership has been used to like last 10, 12 years, 15 years, 20 years or more. And now the shift is towards how do we find the solution, and you don't have the answer. It's going to add further stress to all of them. So if you have to drive performance, it has to start from leadership. It has to be in the context of the world which we live in. And if you don't have well-being, the company won't be able to perform. The people won't be at their best. You won't be able to get the best out of people. So it is at the core. It is at the core. There is nothing furthermore at the core than you can have the greatest strategy, but who's making the strategy? All of you, all of us. And who's going to deliver those strategies? Again, all of us, our workforce. How is it possible if they are not in the best mental state, best physical state, best financial state, and also social? So in Myntra, what we have done is our wellness initiative, we have put under 4 pillars: physical well-being, mental well-being, social well-being, and financial well-being. So financial well-being is not about their compensation. It is about being financially sound, about making what you get as compensation. And a lot of we have the India's workforce is 27% is Gen Z, and it is natural, right? More and younger people are completing and graduating, so they will join the workforce, and you will find that growing. We have already 37% in Myntra, and it will continue to grow. So there is a generational angle as well with us. So how do you be financially prudent? How do you invest at the right time? Getting early wage access as a concept, it is relatively new in India. Some companies are doing it. We have also started doing it. All of those aspects on financial prudence, social, like social after the consumer grade experience which social media has given, the real social interactions have come down a lot, and it's also causing a lot of anxiety. But what we are trying to create is real space where people come together. We have made our office space where there is many opportunities for people to actually mingle socially. We have hobby clubs, we have many other things. We have a pickleball court, we have Dhyan Kaksh, anything which you want to use. And then you come together and do it, not on your phone. And coming to physical and mental well-being, it's all about proactive. Finding the issues upfront. It's not the treatment. That has always been done. We have great insurance policies, hospital coverage, all of that is after one falls ill and gets to the hospital, right? That most of the organizations have kind of mastered, and it's become stable. But what we are focused now is on how do you proactively do that. You spoke about health checks and bringing it to the campus, different forms of health checks. How do we do that? Like simple blood test to the ECG, and it's very easy now, and more things as technology is improving, we do that. Mental well-being, we have invested a lot with our partner, and we call as Mind Peers, and everybody's got access, every employer's got access to therapist, and it is free. There is also about, that's again post factor, right? You have an issue and then you're going out there. But we also do proactively about breathing techniques, how to be mindful, and people do that. People have started, and a good thing about the Gen Zs coming in, they, for whatever troll memes you see and videos you see, I think millennials make them. But having said that, they are actually quite mindful. They are very careful. The alcohol consumption is slightly lesser, and the Gen Zs as they come in. And they do care about some of these aspects of being mindful and connecting back to the roots. So to your question, it's absolutely it's a competitive advantage. It's at core. So if you have a company which takes care of its well-being, and it's also not, all this which I said is infrastructure. But one thing which is more important is like the example you gave on people with special children, right? Special needs children, 7 hours. I think the care, the culture which that organization has to provide flexibility. We use the word flexibility little loosely, and after COVID, work from coming back to office was a big task. People were like, that was like for specifically tech companies, it was like, how many days do your employees come back to work? Like 3 days or 2 days or 5 days. But I think flexibility per se comes from, that's something which most organizations give, but the manager and the team understanding that this person needs and they are able to step up for that person or give the time for that person is actually a huge boom. And that's a culture in that company that they truly care drives a lot around all the infrastructure which you build. The infrastructure is important, like the 4 pillars and everything, but ultimately the culture in the company has to be that the managers and people care for each other and step in whenever the other person needs and provide that flexibility. I think that core is a competitive advantage.
Wonderful. I think fantastic ideas, great proactive measures. And I genuinely liked some of those that you have initiated in the organizations. Great. Fantastic. So